A new housing report from Infometrics New Zealand has revealed that it is the worst time for first-home buyers in 65 years. That's more than a generation, I think. It's certainly longer than I've been alive. Infometrics Chief Forecaster Gareth Kiernan says that first-home buyers purchasing after a sustained period of growth risk buying at the peak of the market and, of course, enjoying less capital appreciation. Why is it so hard? If you are a prospective first-home buyer, what should you be doing? What should your strategy be? Gareth Kiernan from Infometrics joins us in the studio now. Gareth, thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Sean.
That's quite a dire headline. Worst time in 65 years. What do you use to measure that?
So we looked at the total amount of money that you'd be paying to the bank over the life of your mortgage, 25 years, say, and we compared it with what the value of the asset was, the value of the house, by the time you'd paid off that mortgage. And two factors feed into that. Obviously, one you've mentioned, with the potential capital gains over the lifetime of the mortgage. That's a big one. But also the fact that at the moment, house prices compared to incomes are really inflated. So you're having to devote a big portion of your income to actually servicing that mortgage. And unlike the guy who bought in 1987 who complains about 20% interest rates and how difficult that was, inflation was running at 15 or 20% then, and so your income rose pretty quickly. Haven't got the prospect of that now.
Yeah, okay. So I guess the best thing is not to be a first-home buyer right now.
Yeah, and look, the message is not that we're saying to first-home buyers, don't go out and buy, because look, realistically, as a first-home buyer, why are you buying? It's the age and stage of life that you're at, right? You want to settle down, have a family, all that type of thing. What we're trying to say is actually, it's the worst time in 2 generations. So bad luck if you were born in 1995 and you're looking to buy your first house now. There's not a hell of a lot you can do about it, though, is there?
No, there isn't. So you delay, you wait for the market to drop?
So at the moment, look, every forecast I look at of house prices in New Zealand is for the next 12 months, they're going to fall another 5%, another 10% maybe. They might even keep falling out into 2024. So for now, I'm saying, don't go rushing in. Look, if you come across something that's, you like and you can get it for a good price, or what seems to be a good price, you can knock it down a bit, go for it. But there's no rush, not like there was 18 months ago where everybody was piling in and afraid that the house price was going to be up 10% in a couple of months' time.
Okay. Where do you live while you wait? Mum and dad's? I mean, that's the reality too. You're going to be waiting and paying, would seem, increasing rent. So isn't there has there ever been a worse time for renters? I'm saying that in this environment, does anything really change comparatively?
No, but I mean, let's put that rent in perspective though. If you were looking at say an $800,000 house, at the moment, and if house prices go down by 10% over the next year, you're only paying $720,000. So $80,000 is still a hell of a lot of rent that you could be paying in the rent.
Right, okay, all right. What are your predictions for when it becomes a better time to be a first-home buyer? And, we're having a lot of talk about the fact the economic pain isn't over yet and things are going to get worse.
Yeah, it's hard to see it turning around. I mean, you only have to look at that house price to income ratio and the fact it's sitting at somewhere about 9 or 10 times at the moment. And that hasn't happened overnight. Yes, we've had big house price increases since COVID struck and over the last 2 years. But let's be honest about this. This has been a 20, a 30, maybe even a 40-year phenomenon where house prices have consistently run so far ahead of incomes that it's got unaffordable. So you're not going to get into a position where suddenly it becomes affordable again in 2, 3, 5 years. This is a really long-term issue. We know the government is making some changes around the availability of land and enabling more densification. That's a great start. But again, those things are going to take time. And so, like I say, you can't just sit around waiting for the world to change. It's probably not going to change in a great hurry.
Do we then need to change our attitude, Gareth, to home ownership? And I can remember back years ago Don Brash saying this country has an unhealthy obsession with home ownership, and because of that and because it's been easy to make capital gains, we've had available capital in our economy not going into entrepreneurial productive enterprises. It's been going into bricks and mortar and residential property. Is it time that we finally break that habit and see ourselves and our economy differently?
As an economist, we'd love to think that people were indifferent between owning their own home and renting. But the reality is, given the tax structure within New Zealand, given the social support structure within New Zealand, there are a lot of advantages to home ownership that you just don't get as a renter.
It is still the logical choice, in other words.
It is, and that's not even starting to think about security of tenure and all that sort of thing. That's just saying you make capital gains over time, generally speaking, and they're tax-free. But even you think about getting to retirement age, do you still want to be paying, I don't know, $600, $700 a week in rent at that point in your life? Not when your NZ super per couple is only $700 a week. What are you going to live on?
Yeah. Okay, so you're saying that we have an economy, an economic system, a way of living which kind of traps us in this fascination with residential property ownership.
Yeah, look, the government's made changes, and the Reserve Bank, in terms of making investing less attractive. And this is where I think the issue really comes in. It's not in owning your own home. It's in the advantages there are to actually owning a whole heap of them. And previously, and you still can, of course, if you hold it long enough, still make those tax-free capital gains. So the balance has shifted, but it's still a good investment compared to some of the other ones you can get out there.
All right, what more could the government do to make things easier for first-home buyers? Or let's even just try and change our thinking a bit easier for people to find affordable places and sustainable places to live and live their lives.
Yeah, so I talked about the availability of land, and that is one thing we see. I mean, I've been thinking about it over the last few days a bit more, and you think back to the 60s and 70s, for example, where if you had a young family, you could take your family benefit, get it all paid out as a lump sum, and there's your deposit. And I think as a mechanism, certainly in the interim period, until you've really got those housing affordability problems sorted, that sort of mechanism strikes me as a potential thing to do for some of those lower income households, because otherwise you're really in a potential situation where at the moment the only way some young person can afford to buy a house is with getting the deposit either as a gift or a loan, something like that, from their parents. How are their parents going to come up with that money? They've got their own property they can draw the equity on, right?
Yeah.
And so you can see the sort of generational issue where you've got a whole bunch of people. They're already homeowners. They come from a family that's homeowners, and that's going to persist. And that wedge between the haves and the have-nots potentially grows wider over time. There's been talk about that sort of thing internationally, but I think in terms of property, that's one of the keys for New Zealand, is stopping those sort of social issues becoming wider through the home ownership gap.
I hear you absolutely. Look, a little bit broader, if you're comfortable talking about it. A lot of commentators saying that the government, in terms of if you like, political capital, was hoping that halfway through this year, around now, inflation, cost of living increases were going to peak, and they could, next 18 months towards the election, things would ease and get better. We've had economists and commentators here on the platform say that it just isn't so. What's your read on that?
Well, mortgage rates have got another probably percentage point to go up from here. So we're talking between 5.5% and 6% at their peak. So that, for anyone who owns a home, is going to be more expensive over the next 12 months. It's not going to be getting better. You look at just the sheer weight of price costs coming and inflationary costs coming internationally, and whether it's international shipping costs. Everybody says, maybe 2023 they'll be better. I don't really have a great deal of evidence to suggest that is going to happen. It's a nice hope. You look at petrol prices. Well, maybe if Putin pulls his troops out and sends in people to rebuild Kiev instead, that might ease some of it.
Some softening in international oil prices, though, some.
But then you look at refining margins, and they're blown out over the last few months. Yeah. There's nothing better there. And just the sort of general price pressures we're seeing coming through, the tight labour market feeding through into labour costs. No, I'm not hopeful. Look, it may be close to peaking, but it's not going to be falling down as quickly as it will.
Okay, so the pain is here to stay. Grant Robertson's hope, I guess, that the short-term relief of that payment would get people over the hump. You're telling me you don't see that?
No, and look, to be honest, if I was him and I was thinking about trying to buy votes ahead of the 2023 election, I would have been doing it at the 2022 budget. By the time next year's budget rolls around, it's too late to have any meaningful impact.
And we're in a real world of pain then, essentially.
We are, yeah.
One thing I want to ask, though, about this, we have high employment, right? In fact, too high. It's almost an impediment to labour moving where it should in our economy. Yet we still have business screaming to get more workers in here. And from all the conversations I have had, I'd say I do think the government's got the labour market too tight. and we should have more workers. And would that have a market impact on the economic activity and well-being of New Zealand if immigration settings were to be changed?
So you're right in terms of easing some of those labour market pressures. You know, there's potential to actually help the economy grow a bit faster there, because you look at the most sort of employment data over the last 6 months, it's been close to zero growth there, and it's not because, like you say, businesses are wanting workers, they're just not there to take on.
Well, they're telling us they're running at 75% capacity because there is no worker.
And exacerbated, of course, by Omicron and the absences that it has caused. In terms of, if we could bring it back to housing, though, and immigration's impact on housing, I mean, that's the real concern for me, is that, sure, we can free up the availability of land and build more houses, and the build rate is really high at the moment. But the issue is, I think, still who pays for the infrastructure that services those houses. And I know I'm not talking about within the subdivision, for example. I'm talking about the bulk infrastructure, you know, water, wastewater pipes. And for densification, that's potentially a real problem, of course, as well, because you've got all the pipes.
Because you need quite intense
Well, you've got them under the ground, but they were put there in place of, you know, one house every section, not 3 houses every section. So you're going to have to dig all the roads, you know, and those up and replace them.
Gosh, it's almost like we just need to abandon our current cities and start building something new.
Given how well Wellington Council does at keeping its pipes going,
Gareth, we're specifically in that. In fact, they had another 100-year-old pipe burst yesterday. So, Gareth, down to the individual, how do we ride out? What is the best way for an individual to ride out a recession? A middle to lower income New Zealander. What do they do? What are the basics of getting through what is going to be quite clearly a very tough year or more?
I mean, there's things under your control, and then there's things not under your control, I suppose, and you've got to just stick with the things that are under your control. So you are more careful around your spending. You think over the last 2 years, when there has been a lot of money sloshing around the economy and interest rates have been low, all those type of things, you've been able to be a bit more free and easy potentially with that. You've got to make hard decisions, and they are hard decisions. In terms of the labour market, the real big plus is here that the labour market is very tight, and yes, it may ease back a little bit, but we're still talking in 2 years' time unemployment of 4%. So if you want a job, essentially you'll be able to get it. So it's being, you know, looking out for those opportunities as well, where you may be able to, you know, move jobs and move up the pay scale, that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, I talk about things outside your control. You look at petrol prices as a great example, where people still need to drive around and get around.
I've got to admit, I'm not someone who generally feels any impact, because I live a single and unusual life with a relatively good income. I don't notice petrol prices. I don't notice supermarket prices. Man, I had a drive to Auckland last week and back. I'm noticing a significant change when I fill up the Range Rover with a diesel. That's a lot more. And I can absorb it, but I imagine for a normal family, that's really hurting.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because you've still got to take the kids around everywhere, and, you know, if you're driving to work or wherever. So it is that sort of discretionary spending. And I mean, let's be honest, I'm a middle higher income person as well. So I notice the petrol pump because I'm an economist and I look at the prices and everything, but I don't feel quite that pain, you know. So it is very difficult, and like I say, I think there's hard spending decisions that you've got to make, and I can understand from you get down to some of those lower income people, and you didn't have a lot of fat in the system to start with.
Yeah, that's all right. You're already on sort of very low cal income. Gareth, I don't know you've cheered me up at all. In fact, quite the opposite.
Wasn't my aim, Sean.
Yeah, but I guess the thing is, it is time for New Zealanders to wake up and say that hard times, lean times are coming, and it is time to get prepared, not just financially, but also, I think, psychologically for that, and recognise we're not in a boom period anymore. I thank you very much indeed for your time and sharing your knowledge with us today. That is Gareth Kiernan, Infometrics Chief Forecaster.